They say silence is the loudest scream, but in the case of Elena and Marcus Sterling, silence was a weapon. On the night of their 5th anniversary, Marcus stood up in a crowded 5-star restaurant and toasted to his success while laughing at his wife's uselessness. He called her a shadow. He called her a burden. The entire room laughed with him. But Marcus didn't check the property deeds. He didn't check the LLCs. And he certainly didn't know that the ground he was standing on, and the empire he thought he built, actually belonged to the woman sitting quietly across the table. This is the story of the most brutal courtroom karma in history. The atmosphere inside the Superior Court of Judge Harrison Baxter was suffocating. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. The date was November 14th, a Tuesday, and the rain was hammering against the tall reinforced windows of the courtroom, drowning out the distant hum of the city traffic. At the plaintiff's table sat Marcus Sterling. To the public, Marcus was the titan of local real estate, a man whose face was plastered on billboards along the interstate promising luxury living and commercial dominance. He wore a bespoke navy suit cut from Italian wool costing more than most people's cars. He checked his Rolex, a Submariner, every 30 seconds, tapping his fingers against the mahogany table. He looked bored. To him, this wasn't a legal battle, it was an administrative errand. He was here to discard a wife he deemed expired. Across the aisle at the defense table sat Elena Sterling. She was small, dressed in a simple charcoal blazer that had seen better days. She wore no jewelry, not even her wedding ring. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. She didn't look at Marcus. She didn't look at the gallery, which was packed with local reporters and curious onlookers who had heard the rumors about the Sterling split. She stared straight ahead at the empty judge's bench. Marcus leaned over to his lawyer, Julian Thorne, a man known in legal circles as the Butcher for his aggressive dismantling of spouses in divorce cases. "How long is this going to take, Julian?" Marcus whispered, though his voice carried in the acoustic perfection of the courtroom. "I have a groundbreaking ceremony at the Old Mill District at 3. I can't be late." Julian smirked, shuffling a stack of papers that looked like a novel. "Relax, Marcus. She has no counsel of note. Just a public defender type. We'll bury her under paperwork, offer her the settlement peanuts, and you'll be at the construction site by 2. Marcus chuckled. "Good. She doesn't deserve half. She barely deserves the cab fare home." The cruelty in his voice wasn't new. It was the same tone he had used 3 months prior on the night that had led them here. The courtroom faded for a moment as the memory took center stage, the night of the humiliation. It was August. The humidity in the city was thick, but inside Le Chateau, the city's most exclusive French restaurant, the air was crisp and smelled of truffle oil and old money. It was supposed to be their anniversary dinner. However, Marcus had turned it into a business meeting. He had invited 3 of his potential investors, Mr. Galloway, Mrs. Higgins, and a younger tech mogul named Trent. Elena had been an afterthought. She sat at the edge of the round table picking at her salad while Marcus held court. "The key to the Sterling Empire," Marcus boomed, swirling a glass of vintage Cabernet, "is vision. You have to see what isn't there. You have to be aggressive." "Your wife is quite lovely, Marcus," Mrs. Higgins said, politely trying to include Elena in the conversation. "Elena, do you work in the business as well?" Elena opened her mouth to speak, a soft smile forming. "Actually, Elena?" Marcus cut her off with a sharp, barking laugh. He slammed his wineglass down just hard enough to startle everyone. "God, no. Elena doesn't work. Elena barely functions before noon." The table went quiet. Elena's face flushed a deep crimson. "Marcus, please," she whispered. "Oh, don't be shy, darling." Marcus sneered, turning his body fully away from her to address the investors. "See, that's the problem with marriage today. It's a charity case. I make the millions, I buy the land, I build the skyscrapers. And Elena, she picks the curtains. Sometimes she can't even do that right." Mr. Galloway cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, behind every great man is a woman spending his money." Marcus finished the sentence grinning. He looked at Elena with eyes cold and dead. Isn't that right, honey? You wouldn't know the first thing about property value or yield rates. If I died tomorrow, you'd be on the street within a week because you have absolutely no idea how the real world works. He reached over, took a bread roll from her plate and ate it. It was a small gesture, but it was absolute domination. You exist because I allow it, Elena. Never forget that. The investors chuckled nervously, forced to play along with the man they needed to sign a deal with. Elena didn't cry. She didn't storm out. She simply took a sip of her water, her eyes hardening into something resembling steel. That was the moment the marriage ended. Not on paper, but in spirit. Back in the courtroom, the bailiff's voice boomed, snapping the reality back into place. All rise, the Honorable Judge Harrison Baxter presiding. Judge Baxter swept into the room. He was an older man with thick spectacles and a reputation for zero tolerance regarding courtroom theatrics. He sat down, adjusted his robes, and looked over his glasses at the two parties. Be seated, Baxter grunted. We are here for the matter of Sterling v. Sterling, division of assets and finalization of divorce. Mr. Thorne, you represent the petitioner, Mr. Sterling. You may make your opening statement. Julian Thorne stood up, buttoning his jacket. He walked to the center of the room, exuding arrogance. Your Honor, Thorne began, his voice smooth as velvet. This case is simple. We have a clear prenup. We have a clear division of labor. My client, Marcus Sterling, is a self-made titan. He has built Sterling Developments from the ground up over the last 10 years. The defendant, Ms. Elena Sterling, has contributed zero capital, zero labor, and zero intellectual property to the business. Thorne paused for dramatic effect, walking over to point a finger near Elena. She has lived a life of luxury funded entirely by my client. Now she seeks to claim half of an empire she didn't help build. We intend to prove that under the equitable distribution laws of this state, equitable in this case means she leaves with what she came in with, nothing. Marcus leaned back in his chair, smirking at Elena. He mouthed the word nothing. Elena didn't blink. She turned to her lawyer. Her lawyer wasn't a public defender. In fact, nobody in the room recognized him. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, wearing a tweed suit that looked like it was from the 1950s. He had wild white hair and shuffled his papers with a chaotic energy. His name was Arthur Pendleton. Marcus had laughed when he saw him. Where did you find him? He had asked Elena in the hallway earlier. Did you dig him up from a grave? But as Thorne finished his opening statement, Arthur Pendleton stood up. He didn't walk to the center of the room. He stayed by the table, leaning on a cane. Your Honor, Arthur said, his voice surprisingly strong, raspy, and deep. Mr. Thorne tells a compelling story. A story of a self-made man? A story of a useless wife. Arthur looked at Marcus. But stories are fiction, Your Honor, and we prefer facts. We do not contest the divorce. My client wants to be rid of Mr. Sterling just as much as he wishes to be rid of her. However, Arthur pulled a single yellowed piece of paper from his messy stack. We contest the assertion of ownership. We intend to prove that Mr. Sterling does not actually own the assets he claims to be protecting. In fact, we intend to prove that Mr. Sterling has been living on borrowed land quite literally for the last 5 years. Marcus frowned. He whispered to Thorne. What is the old bat talking about? I own everything. My name is on the deeds. Thorne waved a hand dismissively. It's a bluff. Just a delay tactic. Judge Baxter peered down. Mr. Pendleton, those are bold claims. I hope you have the documentation to back that up. Oh, I have boxes of it, Your Honor. Arthur smiled, a dangerous twinkle in his eye. Shall we begin? The first hour of the trial was a brutal display of Marcus Sterling's financial dominance, or at least the illusion of it. Julian Thorne called Marcus to the stand as the first witness. Marcus walked to the witness box with the swagger of a man accepting an award. He swore and sat down and adjusted the microphone. Mr. Sterling, Thorne began, pacing back and forth. Can you tell the court about the Old Mill District project? Certainly, Marcus beamed. He looked at the jury, though there was no jury. He played to the gallery. It's the revitalization of the downtown sector. We are turning old abandoned warehouses into luxury lofts and high-end retail. It's valued at approximately $40 million upon completion. And who acquired the land for this project? I did, Marcus said firmly, through Sterling Developments. And the capital used to purchase this land, did your wife contribute to it? Not a dime, Marcus scoffed. Elena doesn't even know how to write a check, let alone finance a commercial acquisition. I used my own leverage, my own connections. I worked 18-hour days while she was, well, I don't know what she does. Shopping mostly. So, to be clear, Thorne pressed, the funding, the vision, and the acquisition were entirely yours. 100%, Marcus declared. Thorne turned to the judge. Your Honor, we are establishing that the primary asset in this marriage is a business entity solely created and maintained by my client. To split it would be to reward sloth. Objection. Arthur Pendleton croaked from his seat. Counsel is testifying. Sustained. Judge Baxter sighed. Mr. Thorne, watch it. Thorne smiled. No further questions. It was time for cross-examination. Arthur Pendleton stood up slowly, relying heavily on his cane. He grabbed a thick binder from his table, a black binder with no label. He limped toward the witness stand. Marcus watched him with amusement. He thought he was about to be questioned by a senile grandfather. Mr. Sterling, Arthur began, his voice wheezing slightly. You mentioned the old mill district, a beautiful project. I walked past it this morning. Thank you, Marcus said patronizingly. You stated you acquired the land. When did you purchase the parcels located at 400 through 450 Industrial Way? Marcus didn't need notes. He knew his business. We closed on those properties 18 months ago. Bought them from a holding company called Blue Heron LLC. Ah, yes, Blue Heron LLC. Arthur repeated, nodding as if he'd just remembered a grocery list item. And do you know who the principal of Blue Heron LLC is? Marcus shrugged. Some shell company. It doesn't matter. I dealt with their broker. We paid market value. The check cleared. The land is mine. Arthur opened the black binder. He licked his finger and turned a page. You paid $2.4 million for that land, correct? Correct. And you believe that gives you clear title? I have the deed, Marcus snapped. What is the point of this? Arthur looked up, his eyes suddenly sharp as razors. The point, Mr. Sterling, is the lease agreement attached to the title transfer. Did you read the fine print on the air rights and the subsurface rights clause on page 45 of the contract? Marcus hesitated. I have lawyers for that. Yes, Mr. Thorne. Arthur nodded to the opposing table. Mr. Thorne, did you read page 45? Thorne stood up. Objection, I am not on trial here. Withdrawn, Arthur said. He turned back to Marcus. Mr. Sterling, let's move to your personal residence, the mansion on Crestview Drive. Who pays the mortgage? I do, Marcus said angrily. I pay everything. And the deed? It's in my name. Arthur pulled a document from the binder. Exhibit B, Your Honor. A certified copy of the deed for 12 Crestview Drive. He handed it to the bailiff to give to the judge. Mr. Sterling, Arthur continued, can you read the name of the lien holder listed on the second paragraph? Marcus squinted at the copy Arthur held up. It says, Vanguard Trust. And who is the beneficiary of Vanguard Trust? Arthur asked softly. I don't know. Probably the bank. No, Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, filling the room with a sudden heavy gravity. Banks are corporations, Mr. Sterling. Trusts are private. You took out a private loan to buy that house 5 years ago because your credit was overextended, didn't you? Marcus shifted in his seat. It was a strategic financial decision. You borrowed $1.2 million from Vanguard Trust to buy the house you kicked your wife out of, Arthur summarized. And you have been missing payments for the last 3 months, haven't you? I've had cash flow issues. I put everything into the old mill project. Marcus yelled, defensive. So you are technically in default. Arthur smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. And do you know who has the power to foreclose on your house, the sole trustee of Vanguard Trust? Who cares? Marcus spat. I'll pay them when the old mill deal closes next week. Arthur turned to the gallery, then back to Marcus. Mr. Sterling, you seem to be under the impression that you are fighting a stranger. You assume Blue Heron LLC and Vanguard Trust are faceless entities. Arthur turned to the defense table. Elena, Arthur said gently, could you please pass me the document in the blue folder? Elena stood up. For the first time, she looked Marcus in the eye. Her gaze wasn't angry. It was pitiful. She handed the blue folder to Arthur. Arthur took it and placed it on the judge's bench. Your Honor, Arthur said, evidence submitted. The incorporation papers for Vanguard Trust and Blue Heron LLC. Judge Baxter opened the folder. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at the papers, then he looked at Elena. His eyebrows shot up into his hairline. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, looking down at the witness, you might want to consult with your counsel. Why? Marcus demanded, starting to sweat. Who owns the trust? Arthur Pendleton leaned in close to the microphone, his voice booming through the speakers. The sole beneficiary and trustee of Vanguard Trust, and the 100% owner of Blue Heron LLC, is Mrs. Elena Sterling. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Marcus froze. That's impossible. She has no money. She's a housewife. She was a housewife, Arthur corrected. But before she was your wife, she was the only granddaughter of Silas Blackwood. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Silas Blackwood. The name was legendary. He was the original tycoon of the city, a man who had owned half the state in the 1970s. He was a ghost, a recluse who had died 10 years ago, supposedly leaving his fortune to charity. Silas Blackwood, Marcus stammered. No, his name died out. Elena's maiden name is Vance. Vance was her stepfather's name, Arthur said. She took it to hide from people like you, people who only want money. She wanted to be loved for who she was. She tested you, Marcus. For 5 years she hid her inheritance to see if you were a decent man. Arthur leaned on the railing of the witness stand, invading Marcus's personal space. You failed the test, Mr. Sterling. You failed it publicly. You failed it loudly. And now the landlord is calling in the debt. Marcus looked at Elena. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was inspecting her fingernails, looking bored. It was the exact same look Marcus had given her at the dinner. This is a lie, Marcus screamed, standing up. She owns nothing. I bought that land. I built this city. Sit down, Mr. Sterling. Judge Baxter hammered the gavel. Your Honor, this is an ambush, Julian Thorne yelled, jumping up. We were not disclosed this information. It was in the discovery packet sent to your office 3 weeks ago, Arthur said calmly. Perhaps if you hadn't been so busy assuming my client was useless, you would have opened the box marked assets. Arthur turned back to Marcus, whose face was draining of color. But we are just getting started, Mr. Sterling, because we haven't even talked about the old mill construction site yet. You said you're breaking ground today at 3:00 p.m. Yes. Marcus breathed, his chest heaving. I'm afraid you're not, Arthur said. Because as of 9:00 a.m. this morning, Blue Heron LLC, Elena's company, invoked the moral turpitude clause in the land sale contract. The sale has been voided. Voided? Marcus whispered. But I spent $12 million on contractors. I have investors waiting. Yes. Arthur nodded sympathetically. It's a shame, but the land belongs to Elena. And she has decided she doesn't want a strip mall there. She's thinking, a park. A nice, quiet park. Marcus looked like he was going to vomit. The courtroom was in a state of controlled chaos. Judge Baxter had called for a 20-minute recess following the revelation of the Blue Heron ownership, giving Julian Thorne time to scream at his client in the sequestered hallway. "You told me the land was clean." Thorne hissed, his face inches from Marcus's. The confident legal butcher was sweating. "You told me you bought it from a broker." "I did," Marcus shouted back, loosening his silk tie, which now felt like a noose. "I dealt with a broker named Simon Vance. I didn't know Vance was her stepfather's name. I thought it was just a coincidence." Thorne rubbed his temples. "Marcus, you idiot. You bought land from your wife's shell company. If she voided the sale based on the moral turpitude clause, it means she has proof of you acting unethically." "What does she have?" "Nothing," Marcus insisted. "I am a businessman. I am aggressive. That's not a crime. In a civil contract with a morals clause, it doesn't have to be a crime. It just has to be ugly," Thorne snapped. "We have to pivot. We have to prove that even if she owns the land, your work increased its value. We need to claim unjust enrichment. If she takes the land back now, she gets your architectural plans, your zoning permits, everything. We can sue for the value of that work." They marched back into the courtroom, attempting to regain their composure. Marcus buttoned his jacket, trying to summon the arrogance that had fueled him for 40 years. "Your Honor," Thorne said as the session resumed, "while the ownership of the land is unexpectedly complex, the fact remains that my client, Mr. Sterling, secured the investors for the old mill project. His reputation is the engine of this deal. Without him, that land is just dirt. We call Mr. Trent Staton to the stand." A murmur went through the crowd. Trent Staton was the tech mogul who had been at the anniversary dinner. He was young, wearing a hoodie and a blazer, looking out of place in the stiff courtroom. Marcus smirked. Trent was one of the boys. They had smoked cigars after the dinner. Trent would vouch for him. Trent took the stand. "Mr. Staton," Thorne began, "you were present at the anniversary dinner at Le Chateau on August 14th, correct?" "I was," Trent said, his face unreadable. "And during that dinner, did Mr. Sterling discuss the old mill project?" "He did. Extensively." "And were you impressed by his vision?" Trent leaned into the microphone. "I was impressed by the numbers, yes." Thorne smiled. "Exactly. And based on that dinner, did you decide to invest $10 million into the project?" "No," Trent said flatly. Thorne paused. The script was going off track. "Excuse me, but I have an intent to invest email here." "I sent that email before the dinner," Trent corrected. "After the dinner, I rescinded it." Marcus's head snapped up. "What?" he blurted out. "Mr. Sterling, silence," Judge Baxter warned. Thorne looked confused. "Mr. Staton, why did you pull your funding?" Trent looked directly at Marcus. "Because of how he treated his wife." The gallery went deadly silent. Trent continued, his voice steady. "I run a tech firm. We value culture. I watched Mr. Sterling humiliate Mrs. Sterling for 2 hours. He mocked her intelligence. He ate food off her plate like she was a dog. He told the table she was useless." Trent shifted his gaze to Elena, offering a small, respectful nod. "I don't do business with bullies, Mr. Thorne. It's bad for the brand." So the next morning I called the number on the business card Mrs. Sterling had discreetly left on the table when Marcus was in the bathroom. Marcus's eyes widened. "She gave you a card?" "She did," Trent said. "It didn't say Sterling Developments. It said Vanguard Trust Philanthropy and Urban Renewal. I met with Elena the next day. I didn't invest $10 million in Marcus's mall. I donated $10 million to Elena's plan for a community art center on the same site." Thorne dropped his pen. "So," Judge Baxter interjected, looking over his spectacles, "the witness is stating that the value Mr. Sterling claims to have added the investors actually fled because of Mr. Sterling and went to the defendant." "That is correct, Your Honor," Trent said. "Marcus Sterling isn't the asset. He's the liability." "No further questions," Thorne whispered, sitting down heavily. Arthur Pendleton didn't even stand up for cross-examination. He just smiled and said, "The defense likes Mr. Staton very much. No questions." Marcus was shaking. His reputation was being dismantled in real-time live stream to the city. But the nightmare was only beginning. Arthur Pendleton stood up again, lifting another heavy binder. This one was red. "Your Honor," Arthur said, "we have established that Mr. Sterling does not own the land. We have established he drove away the investors. Now I would like to address the issue of lifestyle maintenance. Mr. Sterling claims he pays for everything. He claims Elena is a financial burden." Arthur walked to the projector screen set up in the corner. "I would like to display Exhibit C, the credit card statements for the Sterling corporate account." A spreadsheet appeared on the screen. Thousands of rows of data. "Mr. Sterling," Arthur asked, "you expensed a trip to the Maldives in June. Was this for business?" "Networking?" Marcus lied quickly. "I was meeting potential clients." "In a couples-only bungalow," Arthur pointed to the screen. "Booking reference indicates 2 guests, Mr. Sterling and a Miss Jessica Vane." A collective gasp filled the room. Elena didn't react. She knew. She had known for years. "Who is Jessica Vane?" Arthur asked. She is a consultant," Marcus stammered. "An interior designer." "Strange," Arthur mused, "because according to the payroll records of Sterling Developments, Miss Vane is listed as an executive assistant with a salary of $150,000 a year, yet she has never logged into the company email server. Not once." Arthur turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this is not just adultery. This is embezzlement. Mr. Sterling has been using corporate funds from a company that is currently leveraged by loans from my client's trust to pay for his mistress." "Objection!" Thorne yelled, desperate. "Relevance! The relevance!" Arthur roared, his voice suddenly thunderous. "Is that Mr. Sterling stood in a restaurant and told the world his wife was a burden who spent his money. The truth is he has been spending her inheritance to fund his affair." Arthur slammed his hand on the railing. He humiliated her to cover his own tracks. It is a classic projection of a narcissist. And we are asking the court to freeze all of his personal accounts immediately to prevent further theft of marital assets. "Granted," Judge Baxter said instantly. "All assets frozen. Mr. Sterling, if you try to buy a stick of gum after this session, I want to know about it." Marcus slumped in his chair. He looked at the clock. It was 11:30 a.m. The groundbreaking ceremony was in 3 hours. He realized with a cold dread that there would be no ceremony. There would be no building. And if Arthur Pendleton had his way, there would be no Marcus Sterling left. The lunch break was a somber affair for the Sterling team. Marcus sat in the court cafeteria staring at a ham sandwich he couldn't afford to buy. Thorne had to pay for it. "It's going to get worse, isn't it?" Marcus asked, his voice hollow. "You lied to me about the mistress, Marcus," Thorne said, eating a salad aggressively. "You lied about the land, you lied about the trust. I can't defend a phantom. We need to settle. We need to beg her for a settlement." "I don't beg," Marcus snarled. "Then you will go to jail," Thorne said calmly. "Embezzlement of corporate funds, even from your own company, becomes tax fraud if you deducted it as a business expense. Did you write off the Maldives trip?" Marcus didn't answer. That was answer enough. "We go back in there," Thorne instructed, "and we offer her the house. You keep the business, what's left of it, and we walk away." "The house?" Marcus choked. "That's my palace. I designed every inch of it. It's mortgaged to her trust, Marcus. You don't own it." When court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted. The reporters were typing furiously. The story had broken online. #Sterling fraud was trending locally. Thorne stood up. "Your Honor, in light of the morning's testimony, the plaintiff would like to propose a settlement discussion." Arthur Pendleton stood up slowly. He looked at Elena. She whispered something in his ear. She shook her head. "Your Honor," Arthur said, "my client declines." "Declines?" Thorne blinked. We haven't even made the offer. My client does not want the house, Arthur said. She already owns the note on the house. She can foreclose whenever she likes. She doesn't need you to give it to her. Arthur walked to the center of the room. We are moving to the final phase of our argument, reputational damages and intellectual property. Intellectual property, Marcus scoffed. She's never had an idea in her life. Arthur smiled. Let's talk about the sterling aesthetic, the signature look of your buildings, the blend of Victorian brick and modern glass. It's won you 3 city design awards, correct? Yes, Marcus said, puffing his chest out. My genius. Arthur reached into his evidence box and pulled out a worn, leather-bound sketchbook. It looked decades old. Exhibit D, Arthur announced. The college sketchbooks of Elena Vance dated 20 years ago, before she met you. Arthur handed the book to the bailiff, who placed it under the document camera. On the screen appeared a drawing. It was a sketch of a building. It was identical to the Sterling headquarters. The crowd gasped. Arthur turned the page. Another sketch. This one looked exactly like the old mill proposal. You see, Arthur said, walking toward the witness stand where Marcus still sat. Elena wanted to be an architect. She was top of her class. But you told her she had no talent, didn't you? You told her to quit school and support you. Marcus went pale. I gave her guidance. You stole her portfolio, Arthur corrected. You took her designs, put your name on them, and built a career. You told the world she was useless while you cannibalized her mind. Arthur looked at the judge. We are suing for copyright infringement on 12 major buildings in this city. We are asking for 100% of the profits derived from these designs. That's everything, Marcus whispered. That's every dime I've made in 10 years. Karma is a mathematician, Mr. Sterling, Arthur said, and it is balancing the equation. Then the doors to the back of the courtroom burst open. A man in a cheap suit ran in looking frantic. It was Marcus's personal assistant, nervous and sweaty. He was holding a cell phone. Mr. Sterling? Mr. Sterling, the assistant yelled, ignoring the bailiff. Order, Judge Baxter shouted. Remove that man. No, wait. Marcus stood up. That's my assistant. What is it? The assistant ran to the railing. It's the police, sir. They're at the office. They're raiding Sterling Developments. What? Marcus screamed. On what grounds? Anonymous tip. The assistant gasped loud enough for the whole room to hear. About tax evasion and money laundering regarding the Vane accounts. Marcus fell back into his chair. He looked across the aisle at Elena. She was no longer looking at her fingernails. She was looking right at him. And for the first time in 5 years, she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of an executioner who had just pulled the lever. Your Honor, Arthur said, checking his pocket watch. It seems the criminal justice system has joined our party. I suggest we adjourn for the day so Mr. Sterling can arrange bail. Judge Baxter banged the gavel. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. Mr. Sterling, I suggest you don't leave town. The bailiff will escort you out the back to avoid the press, though I doubt it will help. As the room erupted into noise, Marcus sat frozen. The police were raiding his office. His assets were frozen. His genius was exposed as theft. His useless wife owned his mortgage. But the final twist of the day happened as Marcus tried to leave the courtroom. Elena blocked his path near the exit. She was small, but she looked 10 feet tall. Why? Marcus croaked, his voice broken. You could have divorced me years ago. You could have just left. Elena looked at him, her eyes clear and cold. I was going to Marcus, she said softly. I had the papers ready the night of our anniversary. I was going to give you half. I was going to let you keep the reputation you stole from me because I loved you once. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. But then you laughed. You laughed at me in front of those people. You took the last shred of my dignity, and you toasted to it. So I decided I didn't want a divorce." "What do you want?" Marcus asked, trembling. "I want an erasure," Elena said. "I'm going to erase you, Marcus, piece by piece, until you are exactly what you called me, a shadow." She walked past him out the door and into a wall of camera flashes. Marcus stood alone in the courtroom, the sound of the rain against the windows sounding like applause. The headline on the Morning Gazette the next day was brutal. "Sterling Silver or Fool's Gold Real Estate Tycoon Exposed in Court." Marcus Sterling didn't read it. He couldn't. He was too busy trying to stop his hands from shaking as he sat in the defendant's chair. He had spent the night in a holding cell before making bail that Julian Thorne had to front personally because Marcus's accounts were frozen. Marcus looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and the arrogance that had defined him for a decade had evaporated, replaced by a feral, cornered panic. "We need a character witness," Marcus whispered feverishly to Thorne. "We need someone to remind the judge who I am, my lineage. The Sterling name means something in this city." Thorne looked at his client with disdain. "I called your mother, Marcus. It's a Hail Mary, but she's the only one answering the phone. Everyone else has ghosted you." Marcus let out a breath of relief. "Mother, good. She'll set this straight. She knows I'm the backbone of the family." When Judge Baxter entered, the air in the room was frigid. "Let us proceed. Mr. Thorne, call your next witness." "The defense calls Victoria Sterling to the stand," Thorne announced. The doors opened and Victoria Sterling glided in. She was 70 years old, draped in pearls and a vintage Chanel suit radiating the kind of old-money icy grace that terrified waiters and valets. She walked past Elena without even glancing at her. Marcus sat up straighter. Finally, he thought, loyalty. Victoria took the stand. She swore on the Bible with a gloved hand. "Mrs. Sterling," Thorne began using his softest voice, "thank you for coming. Could you tell the court about your son's character? About his dedication to the family legacy?" Victoria adjusted her microphone. Her voice was crisp. "Marcus has always been ambitious. He has always wanted to be seen as important." Marcus frowned. That was a strange way to phrase it. "And would you say he has been a good provider?" Thorne asked, trying to steer her. "He has supported the family estate, correct?" Victoria hesitated. She looked at Marcus, her eyes unreadable. Then she looked at Elena. "He likes to think he has," Victoria said. Thorne paused. "I'm sorry. Could you clarify?" "Marcus believes he pays for the upkeep of Sterling Manor," Victoria stated plainly. "He believes he pays for my medical care. He believes he pays for the country club memberships." "And doesn't he?" Thorne asked. "No," Victoria said. The courtroom went silent. Marcus's jaw dropped. "Mother, what are you saying?" Judge Baxter banged the gavel. Silence from the defendant. Victoria turned to the judge. "Your Honor, my son is a man of many delusions. The truth is, the Sterling fortune dried up in 2008. My late husband made some very poor investments. We were bankrupt. We were going to lose the manor. We were going to lose everything." She pointed a gloved finger at Marcus. "Marcus didn't save us. He was too busy trying to lease a Ferrari he couldn't afford. The person who saved the Sterling name was Elena." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Arthur Pendleton stood up, not to object, but to listen. Victoria continued, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Elena came to me 10 years ago. She had just married Marcus. She told me she knew about the debts. She used her own trust fund, the Blackwood money, to pay off the liens on the manor. She paid my husband's hospital bills. She pays for my staff. She has supported the entire Sterling clan for a decade." Marcus felt like he had been punched in the gut. "You took money from her." "She made me promise never to tell you," Victoria said, looking at her son with pity. "She didn't want to bruise your ego. She wanted you to feel like the man of the house. So she funneled the money through you. She let you sign the checks even though it was her cash in the account." Victoria turned to Elena. She bought your dignity, Marcus, and you repaid her by treating her like a servant. Thorne stood frozen. His star witness had just nuked the last shred of Marcus's defense. Mrs. Sterling, Arthur Pendleton said, standing up from his chair. Just one question. Why speak up now? Why break your promise to Elena? Victoria looked at Marcus and her expression hardened into steel. Because I watched the video of the restaurant, she said coldly. I saw my son publicly humiliate the woman who saved his mother's life. The Sterling name may be poor, but we were never trash. Until now. She stood up and walked off the stand. As she passed the defense table, she didn't look at Marcus. She stopped in front of Elena, bowed her head slightly, and whispered, Forgive him, dear. I clearly raised a fool. Elena nodded respectfully. Marcus put his head in his hands. He was totally alone. The lunch recess was a funeral procession for Marcus's legal team. Julian Thorne was packing his briefcase. Where are you going? Marcus demanded, panic rising in his voice. The afternoon session starts in 10 minutes. I'm withdrawing as your counsel, Thorne said, snapping the latches shut. You can't do that. We're in the middle of a trial. I can when my client has perjured himself, committed tax fraud, and lied to me about the source of his assets, Thorne said. I'm not going down with you, Marcus. I have a license to protect. You're on your own. Thorne walked out. When court reconvened, Marcus sat alone at the mahogany table. The empty chair beside him was a gaping wound. Mr. Sterling, Judge Baxter said, looking over his glasses. Where is your counsel? He had a family emergency. Marcus lied, his voice cracking. I will represent myself. Very well, the judge said, though his tone suggested he knew exactly what had happened. Mr. Pendleton, call your next witness. Arthur Pendleton stood up. He looked grave. Your Honor, the defense calls Jessica Vane. The double doors swung open. Jessica Vane walked in. She was stunning, dressed in a sharp red dress that looked like a war declaration. She was Marcus's mistress, the woman he had taken to the Maldives, the woman he had promised to marry once he got rid of the dead weight. Marcus breathed a sigh of relief. Jessica. She loved him. She would help him. She knew where the bodies were buried, yes, but she was complicit. She wouldn't talk. Jessica took the stand. She looked at Marcus. She didn't smile. Ms. Vane, Arthur said, you were employed by Sterling Developments as an executive assistant, correct? That was my title, yes, Jessica said, her voice clear. And what were your duties? Mainly, she paused, helping Mr. Sterling hide assets. Marcus stood up, knocking his chair over. Jessica, don't say another word. Attorney-client privilege. She's not your lawyer, Mr. Sterling, Judge Baxter shouted. Sit down, or I will have you shackled, Arthur continued. Hiding assets. Can you elaborate? Jessica reached into her purse and pulled out a small black flash drive. She held it up like a weapon. Marcus didn't trust banks, and he didn't trust computers. He kept a shadow ledger, a record of every kickback he took from contractors, every bribe he paid to zoning inspectors, and every dollar he skimmed from the company accounts to put into offshore shells in the Caymans. She looked at Marcus. He made me keep the ledger. He told me it was our retirement fund. And why are you bringing this forward now? Arthur asked. Jessica's eyes flashed with anger. Because last night when the police raided the office, Marcus called me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask about me. He told me to take the fall. He told me to tell the police that the embezzlement was my idea, that I was stealing from him. A gasp went through the courtroom. He tried to frame me, Jessica said, her voice breaking. He told me that since I was just a mistress, nobody would believe me anyway. She handed the flash drive to the bailiff. This drive contains the shadow ledger. It also contains audio recordings of Marcus Sterling admitting to bribing City Councilman Miller to approve the old mill zoning. Oh, good Lord, Judge Baxter muttered, rubbing his forehead. This was no longer a divorce case. It was a RICO case waiting to happen. Arthur Pendleton turned to Marcus. Mr. Sterling, you attempted to frame your wife as useless. You attempted to frame your mistress as a thief. Is there anyone in your life you haven't tried to use as a human shield? Marcus didn't answer. He was staring at the flash drive on the judge's bench. Arthur wasn't done. Your Honor, based on Miss Vane's testimony and the evidence provided, we move for an immediate summary judgment on the divorce. But more importantly, we move to invoke the fraudulent inducement clause of the marriage contract. Arthur turned to the gallery. Marcus Sterling married Elena for her stepfather's connections, thinking he could exploit them. When he realized she wouldn't let him, he abused her. He has built a life on lies, and now we ask that the court strip him of the one thing he values more than money. And what is that? Judge Baxter asked. His name, Arthur said. The trademark for Sterling Developments is actually owned by the holding company, Blue Heron LLC, my client's company, Arthur revealed. We are revoking his right to use the name Sterling for any commercial enterprise in this state. He cannot build. He cannot consult. He cannot even sell a hot dog under the name Sterling. Marcus looked up, tears streaming down his face. It wasn't sorrow. It was the sheer terrifying realization of total erasure. You can't do that, Marcus whispered. I am Sterling. Not anymore, Elena spoke up from her table. It was the first time she had spoken directly to the court since the trial began. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of 5 years of silence. You are just Marcus now, she said, and Marcus owns nothing. Judge Baxter looked at the evidence. He looked at the broken man representing himself. He looked at the two women, the wife and the mistress, who had united to destroy him. I have heard enough, Judge Baxter said, closing his binder. I am ready to issue my ruling. The courtroom doors were locked. The press was silent. The end had arrived. The silence in Judge Baxter's courtroom was heavy, pressing against the walls like water deep underwater. Marcus Sterling sat alone at the defense table. To his left, the empty chair where his lawyer had sat was a gaping wound. Marcus stared at the mahogany grain of the table, his hands trembling. For the first time, the titan of real estate looked small. His Italian suit, usually his armor, now hung loosely on his frame. Across the aisle, Elena sat perfectly still. She didn't look triumphant. She looked like a statue carved from ice. She was waiting. Judge Baxter spent a long, agonizing minute shuffling the papers on his bench, the deeds, the foreclosure notices, and the damning black flash drive. Finally, he looked up. Marcus Sterling. Judge Baxter began, his voice resonating with a gravity that froze the room. In 30 years on the bench, I have seen greed and betrayal, but I have never witnessed a case of such profound arrogance and total moral bankruptcy as this. Marcus flinched. He opened his mouth to speak, but his voice died in his throat. You came here seeking equitable distribution. The judge continued. You claimed your wife was a burden. You toasted to her uselessness in a crowded restaurant. The irony, Mr. Sterling, is that you are about to get exactly what you asked for, the absolute truth. The judge picked up his pen. It is the judgment of this court that the prenuptial agreement is void due to fraudulent inducement. You cannot enforce a contract to protect assets you are actively concealing in offshore accounts. Baxter turned a page, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Regarding the division of assets, the court recognizes that Sterling Developments has been funded almost exclusively by the defendant, Elena Sterling. You provided the ego, she provided the engine. Therefore, 100% of the company shares, including all current projects and intellectual property, are awarded to Elena Sterling. You can't take my company, Marcus cried out, standing up. It has my name on it. Sit down, Baxter roared. You own nothing. And regarding that name based on trademark infringement of Elena's architectural designs, you are hereby enjoined from using the name Sterling for any commercial enterprise. You are not a brand anymore, sir. You are a liability. Marcus slumped back, gasping. Finally, regarding the marital home, Baxter continued relentlessly. The mortgage held by the defendant's trust is in default. The court grants an immediate order of foreclosure. You have 24 hours to vacate, and for the misappropriation of marital funds to support your mistress, judgment is entered against you in the amount of $4.5 million. I can't pay that, Marcus sobbed. I'm ruined. Then you will work, Baxter said, slamming the gavel down. Case closed. But Marcus didn't get to walk out. As the gavel hit, the back doors burst open. 2 officers and Detective Miller from the White Collar Crimes Division walked down the aisle. Marcus Sterling, Detective Miller asked, stepping up to the defense table. You are under arrest for tax evasion, grand larceny, and bribery. What? No, Marcus shrieked as Miller grabbed his wrist. This is civil court. We have a warrant, Miller said calmly. The click-click of the handcuffs locking around Marcus's wrists was the loudest sound in the room. The camera flashes exploded like lightning. As they dragged him past the plaintiff's table, Marcus dug his heels in. He looked at Elena with desperate eyes. Elena, he pleaded. Please, I'm your husband. Call the governor. Use the Blackwood connections. I'm sorry. Elena stood up slowly. She didn't scream. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small crumpled piece of paper. It was the receipt from Le Chateau the night of their anniversary. She walked over, stepped past the police officer, and tucked the receipt into the breast pocket of his ruined suit. You said I didn't know the value of anything, Marcus, she said softly. But I know the value of freedom. And looking at your accounts, you can't afford it. She turned her back on him. Officer, he's all yours. Marcus screamed her name as they dragged him out, but Elena walked out the front doors into the rain, getting into a black car, not as Mrs. Sterling, but as Elena Blackwood, the owner of the city. 3 years passed. The city moved on. The old mill district Marcus wanted to pave over became Blackwood Park, a lush green space funded by an anonymous donor. Elena retreated from the public eye, running a small architectural firm dedicated to sustainable housing. She never remarried. She told friends she had already been married to an empire and found it cold. As for Marcus, he served 24 months in prison. But the real sentence began when he got out. Blacklisted and bankrupt, the name Sterling was toxic. He ended up working as a shift manager at a budget car rental agency near the airport. One rainy Tuesday, a luxury sedan pulled up to the return lane. Marcus, wearing a cheap blue polo with a name tag that read Mark, ran out with an umbrella to greet the VIP customer. He opened the back door and a woman stepped out. It was Elena. Marcus froze. His heart hammered against his ribs. He looked at her with a mixture of shame and pathetic longing. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to ask if she remembered him. Elena looked at him. For a split second, there was recognition. But then her eyes glazed over. She didn't see a husband. She saw an employee. Thank you, she said politely, her voice void of emotion. She handed him a $5 bill. Keep the change. She walked past him, treating him exactly as he had once treated her, like a shadow. Marcus stood in the cold rain, clutching the $5, watching the woman who owned the ground he stood on walk away. He realized then that the check had finally cleared. He was left with exactly what he deserved: nothing. The story of the Sterling divorce is more than just a legal drama. It is a modern fable about the danger of underestimating the quiet ones. Marcus Sterling made the fatal mistake of confusing kindness with weakness. He thought that because his wife was silent, she was ignorant. He thought that because she didn't brag, she didn't own. But in the real world, true power doesn't need to shout. True wealth doesn't need to humiliate others to feel significant. Elena's victory wasn't just about the money or the buildings. It was about reclaiming her narrative. She proved that the person sitting quietly across the dinner table might just be the one holding the keys to the kingdom. In the end, Marcus built a house of cards, but he forgot to check who owned the table it was built on. Wow! Talk about a reality check. I think we can all agree that Marcus got exactly what he deserved. It's a reminder to treat everyone with respect because you never know who you're really dealing with. What was your favorite part of Elena's revenge? Was it the moment her mother-in-law turned on Marcus? Or was it that final $5 tip in the rain? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories about justice being served cold, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.